And this is the final segment, and Sam Peckinpah. And 1970s Ballad of Cable Hogue, I'm probably not going to count that as genre deconstruction, but it was Peckinpah being sentimental without, being too crudely sexist, which I'll discuss a later film of his in a few minutes that certainly falls from a great height into the Olympic-sized swimming pool of crude sexism. And with the Ballad of Cable Hogue, it's memorable for Jason Robards, Della Stevens, and line of dialogue, which is really quotable, about the finding the water in the desert, about I found it where it wasn't. And unfortunately for Sam, people wanted more of the Wild Bunch, and that was a change-up that, despite what he made and put some relative heart into, I believe it got dumped even at the time of release by Warner Brothers, and of course the Peckinpah fan base is kept it firmly rated as an essential part of the canon. So in terms of deconstruction, though, you could argue that what turned out to be Peckinpah's final traditional Western, 1973's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, was in narrative, was a screenplay written by Rudolf Wurlitzer, and of course we know the premises that Pat Garrett went riding and carousing with Billy the Kid and gang, and then once according to the script and the direction, that the Santa Fe political ring got into the picture, Garrett decided to, for career's sake, sell out to the moneyed interests and began chasing Billy around the New Mexico territory until 1881, when he shot him to death. And what the Peckinpah and Wurlitzer do is a great obituary for the counterculture, and 3 years on from things like Kent State, and where a lot of people just decided stop being hippies, cut your hair, lay down, make friends with the establishment, and do a lot of talking to yourself about how you're going to change things from within. And as we know with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, the making of it wasn't always smooth, and it, like a lot of the things done at Jim Aubrey's MGM, meant that Jim Aubrey, who was a very prominent person at CBS before becoming a studio head, that Aubrey thought he was a better judge of filmmaking than filmmakers themselves were. So the film was yanked away from Peckinpah and released around May of '73, and it was apparently, I've never seen this version, but apparently it was cut to make it play as much of a conventional Western with violent action sequences as possible. And then later, CBS, ironically, got hold of the film and cut it a bit further to make it, I guess, like mild PG friendly for network viewing, because that's back in the '70s when network executives, to justify censorship, would say bromides like, television is a guest in the home. But the version that I have seen of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is the one that came from the Turner company and runs a bit longer. Apparently it's not fully what Peckinpah had in mind, but it restored the framing device he wanted, which was the killing of James Coburn's Pat Garrett in the early 20th century, which pretty much seemed to imply that he was of no further use to the powers that be, and from what I remember, Christopherson was good as Billy, but about a decade and a half too old, and you could argue the same for Bob Dylan playing the sidekick named Alias, although the best contribution Dylan made to the film was giving the soundtrack the great song Knocking on Heaven's Door. And I believe I think in the Turner cut you do kind of hear it in the background, because there's the scene where Slim Pickens' character goes down to the river to die. And so, and that was the end of Peckinpah as a quote-unquote Western director. And you'll notice I didn't say anything about Junior Bonner, but because there's going to be another Western episode probably somewhere in the next few weeks. And it's going to explore the subgenre of modern-day rodeo films that popped up at the beginning and into 1972. I believe the first one out of the chute was the Cliff Robertson's J.W. Coop, and then Steve Einat, the actor who directed just one film before he passed, and that one film was a very neglected, not perfect, but had a lot of promise. The Honkers with James Coburn, again, as a very amoral rodeo rider. And you have Junior Bonner, which gave you the once-in-a-lifetime pairing of Steve McQueen with Robert Preston and Ida Lupino as his parents. And finally, Stuart Miller, who John Wayne didn't think of as a good enough director, but Miller did make a very good film that is both part of the rodeo subgenre and also for 1972 pretty woke about the humiliations that Native Americans went through, both with I guess what was called Indian schools, and then going from that back out into the world of white people. When the Legends Die, which was the breakout performance of Frederick Forrest, and also fine work from Richard Widmark. So, having said that, I'll wrap the rest of this up quickly. Probably the Peckinpah followers would count perhaps as genre deconstruction the modern day stuff and frolic and you know, very hard to defend in terms of sexism and misogyny. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which United Artists apparently thought so much of. They did a guts, you have to have guts to see this kind of ad campaign, which in a way was kind of made the film, like the slave exploitation campaign that Paramount and Dino De Laurentiis did for Mandingo. And with Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, the one positive thing you can say is it's Warren Oates playing Peckinpah as he probably would have liked to have regarded himself, soulful artist, wanting money, and the girl, in this case Isla Vega, and willing to resort to savagery, and it all boomerangs on him, and it's worth probably watching for Oates's performance, but I'm sorry I can't make a case for Alfredo Garcia being like this brilliant film that that you're a Philistine if you don't like, and I can't do that. And then last of all, in terms of, I guess this would count as a modern day Western, and as irony would have it, this was like Peckinpah's one successful box office film in the remainder of his career after The Getaway. Convoy, 1978, based on the C.W. McCall talk, well, you could call it sort of spoken word with sung chorus about the rubber duck, the trucker, being pursued by the sheriff, and you had Christopherson more appropriately cast again as Rubber Duck the trucker, and Ali McGraw, probably happy to be away from Steve McQueen at that point, and doing her best, and the role is kind of like thinly written, if I remember correctly, because it's like Cassie Yates shows up as a waitress very early on and is good in her small role, and you kind of wish she hadn't disappeared. Like toward the end, you have the fine actress Madge Sinclair pops up as a female trucker, and you wish also that Peckinpah had, got his coke habit apparently. Well, it's documented in Marshall Fine's book, Bloody Sam. Wish he could have seen the potential in Cassie Yates and Madge Sinclair and given them more scenes, more dialogue. And it was written by Bill, a.k.a. B.W.L. Norton, who also with Christopherson and Gene Hackman did the very memorable 1971 Cisco Pike, which is the sort of the spiritual father of Inherent Vice, and the Norton script was basically, I think it, from what I remember Stephen Farber saying in New West, it began as a, crying about the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, and then it kind of evolved into as Ernest Borgnine's sheriff is chasing Chris and Allie across the Southwest, that the support that they get means that they find themselves being able to be protected by a makeshift family of truckers and other outcasts. And it's probably worth watching once, because Peckinpah was trying to be well-behaved and make another PG film. It doesn't have the grunginess of Alfredo Garcia, and it's not really one of his best films, and Pauline Kael was trying to come to his rescue and wrote this New Yorker piece that was comparing some of the cinematography and compositions to like the painter J.M.W. Turner, and trying to do him a solid, which didn't really work, because it was a few more years before Peckinpah made his final film, The Osterman Weekend, which did come out years ago on DVD, and I think that has like the studio mandated version and like a rough cut that Sam put together himself, and if I remember right, Ann Thompson, the lady that's in charge of IndieWire back then, she was a publicist, so I believe she's mentioned in a little bit in the Marshall Fine book. And anyway, that's the episode, and thanks so much for listening, and if you like the episode or the reviews and otherwise podcast, please don't hesitate to let people know. You can link to it, retweet it, mention it on Facebook, and spread the word. And I'll be back in a few days with another episode, and very likely one of the things I'll be talking about is Edgar Wright's new documentary, The Sparks Brothers. So this is Terry McCarty, and wherever you are listening to this, day or night, thanks ever so much, and see you again soon. And this is the final segment, and Sam Peckinpah. And